And welcome. I call to order the November 4th, 2020 meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. As a preliminary matter, permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Josh Levy?
Here.
Barry Kaufman?
Here.
John Connolly?
Here.
Rick Lunetta?
Here.
Dick Riley?
Yes.
Tom Jacob?
Here.
John Conley, I think I called your name, and
did.
Louise Miller will be
Not yet.
delayed. Louise Misgard?
Here.
Great. Good evening. This open meeting of the Needham Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reliable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law, except for the agenda item entitled Citizen Requests to Address the Finance Committee. This meeting will not feature public comment. For the meeting, the Finance Committee is convening by Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body will be available on the town's website. Unless otherwise noted, the public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. And as the first order of business, I would ask for a motion that this meeting will be continued at the committee's next meeting of December 9th if a technical problem develops and the meeting is terminated or cut off.
I make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you. We can now turn to the first item on the agenda, and that is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of September 23rd, 2020.
Move the approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. We got to do it.
Well, we technically have to do this in order. So,
Okay.
Dick? You're muted.
Aye.
Barry?
Approve.
Rick?
Approve.
Tom?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Josh?
Aye.
Very good. So the second item on the agenda is to discuss the, with the school department, Mr. Gudenkamp, superintendent, building construction design, the school facilities master plan, and Emery Grover.
Madam Chair, was there opportunity for public comments to address the Finance Committee?
Oh, sorry. I left that out. Are there any citizens that would like to address the Finance Committee?
Madam Chair, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so you may proceed.
Great. So the second item then on the agenda is the discussion of the school department's building construction and design school facilities master plan, and then specifically to discuss the Emery Grover building.
Madam Chair, may I ask through you to the superintendent if there are any attendees you wish to bring into the meeting?
There are, thank you. I'd actually ask if it is possible for, well, if it is possible, Madam Chair and Dave, for all of the existing attendees to be brought into the meeting, that would be helpful because most of them will participate in this conversation.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I brought in everyone who was a panel, who was an attendee.
Great. Thank you. So Dan, did you want to start?
Sure, if I will. So, Madam Chair, members of the Finance Committee, thank you very much for, I think we scheduled this meeting fairly recently, so I appreciate you accommodating this conversation this evening. And it's actually quite an important and an impactful conversation. As members of the Finance Committee know, we have launched the town and school department's budget season. And as part of the capital process, as well as a part of the school committee's long-standing and long-term goals, we have finally studied and actually selected some preliminary options for the renovation and construction needs of three of our school buildings. And actually with the attention that is paid or could be paid to these buildings, that actually will complete what has been a pretty aggressive and actually the way the community has supported its school buildings over the last 20 years in a significant way. These last three buildings, the Emory Grover School Administration Building, Pollard, and Mitchell, really, if you will, in a way, complete the inventory of attention for schools. This is a very expensive proposition, what we're proposing to you this evening. All told, as we look at all of these three projects, we're talking about approximately $275 million in renovation and in construction for these three buildings. What I will tell you is that while it is two school buildings where students attend, it also satisfies the needs really of all the schools and all the students in the district. So although it is an enormous number, it's one that does address all school needs for actually the next several generations, especially as we consider what our enrollment has been. While the number is enormous, what we're proposing to you in both projects, Emory Grover and also school construction, is actually we're proposing the most cost-effective ideas. And again, as I said, this will meet our programmatic needs. Nonetheless, this is a conversation, and we recognize this is the first step in a very long and complicated process. We think, though, and the school committee believes, it's really critical to get this conversation going For years, these projects have been on the capital in the capital books and capital planning for many, many years, and now we actually have some numbers. We have some ideas that suggest a direction, that suggest a proposition. At the same time, these projects fall within the community, and there are other projects as well. So that's why this is a first step in getting this conversation going, and to share with the Finance Committee what the projects are proposed to be, how they meet our needs, and then it's up to you for questions and, of course, obviously next steps over the next many months and years ahead of us. So what I'd like to propose we do is for you to hear from both designers. Joel and Reese are going to talk to you about the Emory Grover study. We're not going to tonight get into a lot of detail about program and why these meet the program, although certainly that'll be part of it, and you may have questions about it. We really do want to talk to you about the process and how we landed here and the costs associated with it and next steps. And then our team from Durham Whittier will share with you our student-based plans around Pollard and Mitchell. So with that, as a preface, I think I will turn, and if it's okay to share the screen as well, Madam Chair, I think there are a couple of presentations that you'll receive.
Sure.
I think I will turn this over to...
Excuse me, before, somebody might have a question, John?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. I just had one quick question for you, Dr. Gutekunst. Is this, so you said this is the beginning of a conversation and that we'll be seeing several suggestions. Should we take them as suggestions that might be altered in the future? Or should we take these as a finalized set of proposals that you're recommending?
Yes. And what I mean by that, what I mean by that, to be perfectly honest, is the school committee has taken votes on these proposals, and you'll hear about that tonight. And the school committee, as it has always done, now realizes that there are large conversations and many conversations that need to unfold. How do these projects fit into the rest of town finances and projects? What does the MSBA think? Because they will have an opinion about what the school committee has voted on. So it was important for the school committee to take a vote and to move forward. And now, as part of this conversation that will unfold with the select board, the finance committee, town meeting, the MSBA, and ultimately town voters, there'll be many different opportunities to think about, perhaps even reconsider what we envisioned tonight.
Thank you.
With that, I might suggest that I think, Joel, are you first up here, or?
We're ready to go. We can, Reese.
Okay.
You'd have to share with Reese.
Okay.
Okay. Just give me a moment to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that all right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the Finance Committee a summary of the Emory Grover building study. My name is Reese Schroeder, and Joel Bargman and I, for the past year, have been working on this project, exploring the challenging exploration, various ways to provide the Needham School administration with updated modern facilities that would meet their department needs for now and well into the future. All right, I'm having a little difficulty. There we go, okay. Tonight's presentation begins with a brief background summary of the complete feasibility study prepared on behalf of the Needham School Administration, including initial studies, test fits, and site studies, preliminary concept developments, property best use studies, and 3 final options which address the programmatic needs of the school administration. Each of these final options meets the administration's program needs while presenting different opportunities, each with parking challenges, high-level cost comparison between the 3 options based on detailed estimates prepared and refined through the process. We'll conclude with a review of our analysis and conclusions made. We performed program test fits with the existing Emory Grover building, looking at ways to accommodate the school department into the building. The requirements of the building program exceeded the area of the existing building without constructing an addition. 5 town-owned sites were studied for potential new construction, and all were deemed to be inadequate as identified in the report, except for the Hillside Elementary School site. A property best use study also looked at the value of Emory Grover building if the town were to sell the property to a private developer for conversion into apartments, condominiums, or sold as is. Our preliminary examination of the Emory Grover site and its size limitations expanded our exploration into 6 options, 3 at Emory Grover and 3 off-site. Option 1 proposed to tear down the existing building to construct a new facility closer to Highland Avenue. This option maximized available area behind the new building for parking. It also meant taking down a historic structure and town landmark. Having a new office building with the most parking available suggested further study. Option 2 looked at preserving the front and partial side walls of the historic building, removing everything behind and constructing a new building similar to option 1. The study became very expensive due to extensive bracing of the old walls to a new structure and did not result in sufficient parking. This option was rejected. Option 3 proposed to restore the exterior of Emory Grover, renovate the interior, and add an addition on the rear or east side of the building. This option warranted further study. Option 4 and 5 looked to the Stephen Palmer block along Pickering between Mays and Great Plain, with a possible new building location by tearing down Stephen Palmer or constructing a new building at Greensfield on Great Plain Avenue. With Stephen Palmer under a lease agreement through year 2027 and active town use of Greensfield, options 4 and 5 were eliminated. Option 6 studied the tear down of Hillside Elementary School and constructing a new administration building. While the site offered ample room for parking and future expansion, the remoteness from town center, as well as existing environmental issues, eliminated this option. The final options all occur at Emory Grover. These options are further presented here tonight. Option 1 proposes to tear down the existing building and construct a new office building. This option will net 86 parking spaces between on-site and off-site. Among the final options presented, this option is in the middle in terms of construction cost. Option 2 is represents the restoration of the Emory Grover exterior, renovation and modernization of the interior with an addition attached on the rear. This option nets 72 parking spaces between on-site and off-site and presents the least construction cost among the options. The third option, the renovation with addition, rotated 90 degrees. The advantage of rotating the addition is the ability to bring in natural light from north, east, and south walls. It offers challenges with connectivity to the building, existing building, and it is the most expensive of the options. Option 3 nets 66 parking spaces between on-site and off-site. Because of the desirable opportunity for daylighting, option 3 is further explored with a parking garage to be constructed under the addition. This does add a potential $750,000 to the highest cost option, and that's 74 spaces between on-site and off-site parking. Sufficient parking is a common challenge with all schemes we explored. A solution moving forward with the Emory Grover location is to augment on-site parking with remote parking at the Stephen Palmer site. This diagram indicates construction of a new 24-space parking lot along Pickering Street, reserved for school administration use. To summarize the parking requirement, we reached out to school administration for their full-time equivalent or FTE employees, including the IT department. There are 48 FTE employees. Added to this number are the transitional visitor parking requirements based on a typical day. Transitional parking needs are 19 spaces. These parking requirements total a department need for 67 parking spaces. All three final options meet the department requirement for parking. With the addition of the conference center, overflow parking would be by remote parking along Oakland Avenue and Highland Avenue. The new construction scheme seen in this slide site plan shows how a new building is moved closer to Highland Avenue to provide more on-site parking. A zoning bylaw amendment is required to exceed the maximum FAR, in addition to several zoning waivers in order for this option to move forward. This approach was favorably received by the planning board as it achieved the maximum parking on site. The board's opinion was that FAR was an issue that could be addressed for the project. There was concern for saving the existing building. The new construction approach includes a basement and 3 floors of departmental use, including IT and conference center. This is a building section diagram showing the basement and 3 stories with an open connecting stair from the lobby to the 2nd level conference center. The renovation and addition scheme proposes to restore the Emery Grover building exterior and construct an addition on the rear or east side. This option achieves 48 parking spaces, including 10 spaces in front of the building. Planning board members expressed the importance of keeping the historic building, but questioned whether parking in front of the building could be eliminated. This approach would require additional zoning waivers to the new construction scheme, including building height and number of stories. The main challenge with Emery Grover is the lack of accessibility into and out of the building. The basement is partially below grade, and the 1st floor is nearly 8 feet above. An addition offers a way to solve this in conjunction with solving the spatial needs of school administration. The renovation and addition scheme utilizes the existing building for large program spaces, including IT and the conference center, accommodating all offices and departments in a new addition. While the program requirements are met with this option, the density of the addition compromises natural light and fresh air for interior spaces, as well as having to maintain parking in front of the building. The main entrance is at grade off the rear parking lot, with Highland Avenue facade closed except for egress only. This is a building section diagram showing how the new addition on the right connects with the existing building on the left, with a centrally located elevator providing connectivity. The addition rotated option also proposes to restore the Emery Grover building exterior and construct an addition on the rear or east side. This L-shaped configuration provides for 42 parking spaces, including 10 spaces in front of the building. This option would also require the same zoning waivers as the renovation and addition option, in addition to the new construction option. The advantage of this layout is the available natural light on both north-south elevations, as well as natural ventilation, meaning offices can ring the perimeter with more utilitarian functions located in the center. The connection and department distribution within the building are similar to the 2nd option, or renovation with an addition. The addition rotated scheme utilizes the existing building for large program spaces, including IT and the conference center, similarly to the 2nd option. Further explore option 3 to improve the parking count, we looked at the feasibility of constructing a parking garage under the addition, accessed from Oakland Avenue. This option would provide a total of 50 parking spaces on site. The garage option could work architecturally by raising the grade level floor to align with the existing first floor, excavating down approximately 5 feet. Entry into the building from the parking lot would be at grade level with a lobby space. The schedule shown here was produced by Hank Haff as part of the Permanent Public Building Committee. And Hank, I'm not sure if you want to briefly go through the schedule.
Certainly. It looked at 2 stages of funding. The first in May of 2021 for the design funds for moving forward on the project. And then the second in May of 2022 for the construction funding for the project. Both of these, these are 2 options. They would run in parallel. And from, there's built into this program, you can see about a 8 to 10 month period of time in which Hillside would be prepared for temporary use so that the school administration could move out of the Emory Grover building into the Hillside building, and then the work, the addition and the renovation proceed without anyone occupying the site. Those Hillside temporary costs are also factored into the total cost for the project. In each of these cases, the finished project would be ready in May timeframe of 2025, and the move-in would occur over the summer to reoccupy the space. Back to you.
Thank you. So why is option 3, addition rotated, preferred? I want to say that option 3 was chosen by the school committee in a vote, and the Emory Grover is perhaps the oldest remaining building in the town of Needham. The building has been identified as a gateway into town center. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The desire to renovate the exterior as it contributes to the town center while providing a modern office building for the school department is a healthy and safe working environment represents a valid path forward. With the inclusion of the parking garage, the parking deficiency is further reduced by 16 cars. What about rental versus construction? We looked at that. If the school administration rented lease space based on $30 a square foot at an approximate need of 35,000 square feet, they'd be looking at an annual lease at over $1 million compared with the 20-year mortgage. The town either pays the property owner or invests into the town's physical facility infrastructure. The value of Emory Grover to a private developer, as described in detail on page 50 of the study, demonstrates demolition of the building and construction of new condos or apartments as potentially viable. Option 2 is the baseline. That is the renovation and addition. It's the least expensive of the 3 options. It renovates the building as the town center gateway. It has inefficient parking. The density of the addition creates an interior with little natural light. Option 1, the demolition and new building construction, is an add of about $300,000. It requires demolition of Emory Grover. It has the best parking count on site. Again, the density of the design creates an interior with little natural light. Option 3, the addition rotated, is the most expensive option. And this number does not include the garage. This renovates the building as the town center gateway. Parking is improved if an addition to the garage, and it provides the best building layout for interior design, natural light, fresh air, and this was the option that the school committee selected. And that concludes the summary.
Yeah, I should point out, Reese, that the school committee adopted the rotated version without the underground parking.
Without the garage, that's correct.
Without the garage. And it was the review with the planning board that was looking at trying to maximize the parking on site. But even without that underground parking, which is very expensive, we are able to achieve our goal, but not necessarily the planning department, the zoning bylaw goals for parking on that site.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Madam
Reese.
Chair,
Madam Chair, this is Dan. Do you want to take questions now for our designers, for Joel and Reese, or wait till the next presentation, take them all together? What makes the most sense?
I think we should keep going because I don't want to get, I want to make sure we cover both presentations.
Okay, absolutely. And then you can think about questions. And this presentation, Reese, I know this is being recorded. Has that been forwarded to, I know we have it. I guess I'll ask Ann, have we forwarded this to the Finance Committee so they have a copy?
The Finance Committee has received the entire draft report, or the entire final report.
Okay.
So this is really a summary of that report.
That's fine.
But I believe you already have this. This is very similar to the final presentation that was given to the school committee.
Yep.
And I believe that's on the school department website, but this presentation can also be forwarded as needed.
Okay. So why don't we then have Don and Michelle and or Jason jump in and talk about the school master plan.
Thank you, Dan.
Is there a way for me to share my screen?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Finance Committee. I'm Don Walter, Principal with Dorn Whittier Architects. And with me tonight is Michelle Rogers and Jason Boone, who are both senior associates in the firm and project manager and educational planner on this particular project. So there is a lot of information developed, and there's a lot of information in this presentation. What we're going to try to do is the skim approach, knowing that you have, I believe, all the general information from the study we've done. But just as a way of introduction, what I'm going to do is let you know that this was really a K-8 space needs study that ended up being a focus on the Mitchell and Pollard schools because they have the greatest needs. So what I'm going to do quickly is just let you know what the process was that we went through. Michelle, if you could click that.
Yeah, it would be nice if I could. Hang on. There we go.
Okay, so we started basically just about 12 months ago. And we went through and visited all the buildings, met with principals and staff, reviewed schedules, programming goals and whatnot. And we reviewed enrollment projections, capacity needs within all of the schools. We looked at the buildings and assessed them for capital needs ourselves, along with our consultants, developed plans for that, developed costs for that, developed potential solutions to address some of the space and educational needs that have been identified, and provided test fits on the building sites. to see how those would work. With those all put together, we developed costs. These are project costs for all of those possibilities, which range from capital improvements to additions and renovations to new. Developed a master plan with timelines. We ended up with a number of different iterations or options to choose from. We've since presented that information to the school committee and the PPBC. And as Dan mentioned, the school committee did take a vote on one of those options, and we're actually just finalizing the report to be issued. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Michelle to talk about some of the existing conditions and the capital improvements. Then Jason will get into the options that we developed. Thank you.
Thank you. So as Dawn had said, we're going to just take you through a high level of all that work that we did, starting with the facilities assessment. We looked at all of the school buildings within the district with the exception of the high school. We assessed them for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, architectural components, accessibility, as well as site and civil. And we came up with this chart here, which sort of gives you the overview of how each of those buildings scored. So in one look, you can see whether or not the district needs to invest in your mechanical systems throughout the district or in a particular building across the district. The Seaside School, functioning as a school, is down here at the bottom. And then you have Sunita Williams, which obviously functions quite well in the excellent category. Everything else sort of ranges from very good to fair in most categories, with the exception of the Mitchell School. And that is here on this line here. And you can see that Mitchell, just by looking at this, has the most red dots within its categories. And these are in fire protection, mechanical systems, accessibility, exterior building elements, overall functionality of the building. And you'll see a quick glance will tell you that the Pollard School is not far behind, scoring in the fair condition for all of those other pieces. The one thing that we found here that came as a surprise to us when we looked at the functional use of space, and that is how is it performing in serving the students that are currently in the school, we found that High Rock is not faring well. And that is due to the capacity issues for High Rock. High Rock is overcrowded and therefore has a lot of spaces that have been converted from their original use to teaching spaces. And so for that reason, High Rock became part of our assessments as we began to go looking at how to solve district-wide problems. First, we wanted to focus just a little bit more on the needs of the Pollard and the Mitchell and to the extent of those and what the cost of that would be. So we took the capital improvements plans and then we sent them out to the cost estimators. And we came back with an overall cost of the Pollard School if we were to try to address all of those needs at approximately $40 million. And the Mitchell School at approximately 25. And that would address all of the needs that you have here with the one exception of the functional use of space. And that is because you need more space and that isn't part of the capital improvement piece. So what's actually included in the 40 million and the 25 million would be things like accessibility upgrades, building envelope upgrades for the Pollard School. In the Pollard School, we actually looked at replacing the modulars, upgrading the heating and the electrical, and then adding fire protection to the remaining part of the building. There's a portion of that building that has fire protection and then another part that does not. And then likewise on the other side for Mitchell, the $25 million would include window upgrades, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection. What the money does not get you is some of these areas where we call triggers. So once we start spending a certain amount of money, over 30% of the value of the building, we actually trigger other codes and are required to do upgrades beyond what we've actually identified as being needs. And those include seismic upgrades throughout the building. And then it would also require the $25 and $40 million do not address any of those capacity issues that we spoke about before. So with that in mind, we looked at possible solutions. I'm going to ask Jason to walk you through these.
So you can appreciate how complicated these master plan explorations can get when you're trying to manage all of these different considerations and all the various constraints that exist with each one of these buildings. So ultimately what we did was we conducted what we called the what if workshop, where we tried to brainstorm the greatest possible range of district-wide master plan options. And so what's depicted in this chart are the 7 master plan scenarios that we ultimately explored as part of this process. The green squares represent potential projects for each scenario. So each column represents one complete plan, and each row represents the action that's going to be taken at each of the schools that were being studied. So I'll try to briefly go through this. In the first left-hand column is what we call the status quo option. Each one of these are organized around where the grade level groupings ended up being in the district. So in the status quo, for example, all of the existing grade configuration remains intact, and the issues that Michelle identified that came out as part of our facility and educational assessments are addressed at the existing building. So as you look down, for example, the spatial issues, the facility issues associated with Mitchell are proposed to be resolved in a new K through 5 5-section elementary school on that site. Similarly, the capacity issues that were a little bit unexpected that we identified at High Rock would be addressed as an addition to that facility in place. And then finally, similarly at Pollard, addressing both the physical and the capacity issues at Pollard by considering a renovation addition on that site, or even potentially a brand new building on that site. As we move to the right, the next master plan scenario speculates about changing the grade configuration, an educational move that would put 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all together under one roof. It's labeled discontinue High Rock because in this scenario, the existing High Rock facility at the conclusion of the master plan would be available to be repurposed for another function. So as we look at the green squares again, similarly a Mitchell project 5-section elementary school on that site, a new or renovation addition at the Pollard site to house grades 6, 7, and 8 all on that site, with High Rock again being repurposed for some undetermined purpose in the future. One of the advantages of this particular scenario is that if the Pollard project were to go first, then potentially High Rock could be available to be used as swing space for a Mitchell project, which potentially could be sequenced second. And we'll talk more about the timing of those things in just a moment. So growing out of that idea of it may be educationally appropriate to move back to a model where 6th, 7th, and 8th grade are all under one roof, the third scenario, labeled High Rock as an elementary school, again, looks at putting 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at Pollard, but instead of at the conclusion of the master plan, the High Rock simply being vacated and available for another purpose, this scenario imagined High Rock being repurposed as a 6th elementary school in the district. The key advantages of this scenario are not only could High Rock be used as potential swing space for a Mitchell project, but because there would be 6 elementary schools in the district rather than 5, the project that would need to be executed at Mitchell could be reduced and would require only a 3-section per grade elementary school rather than a 5-section per grade elementary school. Progressing to the right one more column, this next scenario takes that same idea, but it considers placing 2 6 through 8 middle schools in the district in recognition that the Pollard site may be too constrained to have all of the 6 through 8 students on that one piece of property. So in this scenario, not only would there be a project at the existing Pollard site, but it speculates about a project at the Newman site, converting it to a second 6 through 8 middle school. The key consequence of that particular move and taking Newman offline as an elementary school is that not only would High Rock need to be repurposed as an elementary school, but the Mitchell project would now have to be a 7-section elementary school rather than a 3 or a 5-section elementary school. This was one of the scenarios that was very quickly dismissed by the group because of the infeasibility of putting so many children on the Mitchell site. Moving one column to the right again, a similar scenario, but rather than 2 6 through 8 middle schools, it speculates about 1 5 through 8 middle school, and that project trying to go on the Pollard site. It would mean that the High Rock School could be repurposed for some future use, and Mitchell would only need to be a 4-section per student project, or excuse me, 4-section elementary school project. But obviously trying to put all grades 5 through 8 on the Pollard site is putting an enormous amount of pressure geographically on that piece of property. Again, this is one of the options that was discontinued fairly quickly in the study. The next master plan scenario takes that idea of a 5 through 8 grade configuration, changing the elementary schools to K through 4, one step further, and looks at, well, if we can't fit all of the 5 through 8 on the Pollard site, what if we look at converting Newman to a 5 through 8 middle school as well? And the consequences of that were that if High Rock were included in the elementary school inventory, that a 3-section K through 4 project could be executed on the Mitchell site. And this option stayed under consideration for quite a long time. Ultimately, the disadvantage of having to change the district-wide grade configuration to a K through 4 and 5 through 8 was an unattractive scenario for the school committee. And then finally, the last scenario that we explored was born out of the idea of, is there a silver bullet, you know, the one project that can solve all of our issues district-wide? And so we explored the idea of discontinuing both the Mitchell building as an elementary school and discontinuing the High Rock facility as a school building, and looking at what was labeled a super school, both a K through 5 elementary school and all of the 6 through 8 middle schoolers, all on one property, all on the Pollard site. And as perhaps you can imagine, that was deemed infeasible for the sheer number of students that would be on the Pollard site as a result. And so after discussions with the PBBC and the school committee, these were the 3 scenarios that were deemed the most likely to be taken under consideration. The status quo with its 3 projects, and you can see them summarized there, a renovation addition to serve grades 7 and 8 at the Pollard site, an addition on the High Rock site, and a 5-section school at Mitchell. The discontinue High Rock, which is very similar, it takes advantages of High Rock as swing space, but still results in a 5-section school at Mitchell. And then finally, the High Rock as a 6th elementary school, where you get the advantage of High Rock as swing space for a Mitchell project and the downsizing of the Mitchell project to a 3-section per grade project. And these are the sort of test fits that we're going to quickly share with you. We actually conducted feasibility study tests for all of the green potential projects that we just talked about, but tonight we're only going to highlight these few. And so starting with the status quo scenario, the 2 diagrams that you're seeing, the dark gray in the High Rock image represents the existing building, and the orange represents a 2-story addition in the most likely place that we think an addition might go. In the bottom image, you see what what's represented as a 5-section Mitchell project just west of the existing Mitchell facility. It's important to note that asterisk down there with the Mitchell project that while this was deemed geometrically feasible, right, this size project as a 2-story building could fit on the property, the construction logistics and the disruption to students if they were to stay in the building during construction was deemed infeasible and therefore requires a temporary school project at the DeFazio site, which Michelle will talk about in the sequencing and cost estimate for that particular project. In the discontinue High Rock scenario, what you're seeing in the upper image is an approximately 80,000 square foot addition on the south side of the building, essentially connecting the 2 existing arms. This potentially isn't the only way that this could be executed, but for purposes of the master plan, this was proof of concept that you could actually add on to this building and reorganize the site a little bit to fit all grades 6 through 8 on the property. And then at the bottom, again, you're seeing that Mitchell project on the existing Mitchell site. The important difference here, as I mentioned, is if you execute the Pollard project first and can vacate the High Rock property, then High Rock could be available as swing space so that the Mitchell students don't have to be on the property during construction or in a temporary school over on the DeFazio property. And then finally, the top image is the same for this as it considers 6 through 8 at Pollard, just like the previous option. The difference here is that on the Mitchell property, you have the opportunity to execute a 3-section per grade school rather than a 5-section per grade school. And just graphically, you can see how much more room there is to execute such a project on the Mitchell site.
So you are the financial committee, so we should start talking about some money. So all of those options we actually did send out to our cost estimator. And each one of those options that Jason just explained to you, each fit test was cost estimated for what that building would be in $2020. So these are actual costs. These are actually done back in June. So that will be another asterisk when we start looking at our plans. So you can see the array of the cost that for those buildings, including the temporary modular school on the DeFazio Park site. The other part to keep in mind as we start going through these timelines is when we started laying out how to actually execute these in a timely manner, over the course of each year, we escalated these costs that you see here by 4.5% per year. None of the costs that you see in the following timelines actually incorporate any of the MSBA participation, and that's something that Ann and Dan can talk to you a little bit about as we work our way through this. So we took the 3 master plan options that Jason just discussed, looking at the status quo overall. It was between 304 million to 317. The discontinued High Rock was 287 million, and then the High Rock as a grade 6 elementary school, we actually looked at several different options on how to actually make this one work. We're not going to actually talk about the discontinue High Rock one because we sort of put that option aside, given the fact that the 5-section grade Mitchell School is really tight on that site. We did keep this status quo because it is what you have, so it's very good to compare what you have to future solutions. So in the status quo timeline, sorry, I have to move something here. In the status quo timeline, we looked at starting a 5-section Mitchell School as an MSBA project, and then following it with the Pollard School as an MSBA project. And as we start talking about the MSBA, the timelines, they're very organized and very succinct, but you have to follow certain patterns. So the time to do a building under the MSBA project timeline is a little bit longer than if you were to just take it on as a town project. So you're going to see some of these extended project lines, and then we'll start talking about accelerated, meaning that the town would take on the project by themselves. In the Mitchell, if you were to put your statement of interest into the MSBA early for the Mitchell project, you would still have to invest some money to keep the Mitchell school going. So you're looking at approximately 2 years, and for that, you would be investing about $1.5 million in capital just to keep that school going until you get to a point where you know that you're going to be tearing it down. You'd have to invest some money into the High Rock School, and you'd certainly have to invest some money into the Pollard School, because that would be your second MSBA project. You would let the first project go all the way through the timeline, and then you would begin to apply for the Pollard School to be part of the MSBA project timeline, and then that would continue going through. Jason did mention that we would need a temporary elementary school for the Mitchell students. So you see that down here. Once you are under construction with the MSBA, you'd have to make sure that those children have a place to go. So we've built that into our timeline down here as well. When we talk about the accelerated Pollard School, even as an MSBA project, you might be able to accelerate it by applying early into the SOI program and then working your way through. So in all scenarios, you will see that time is money. This scenario means that you're not completing your master plan until 2032. And because of that, the costs are quite high. We then started looking at High Rock as the elementary school. We looked at Pollard being the first MSBA project because it is the larger school and more costly project. It would benefit the town if the MSBA were to partner with the town for that project. And then we looked at Mitchell being the second MSBA project. So here you would see that you would go into the MSBA pipeline in 2021. And if you're fortunate enough to be accepted right away, you would go through that process and you would be able to open a new, a renovated Pollard School for grades 6 through 8 in 2027. At that time, you would also be, once you move the students out of the High Rock School, you would be in line for the second MSBA project, which would be the Mitchell School. Over the course of those years, while you're waiting to get into the pipeline for the Mitchell School, you would still have to be investing money to keep the school running. So that would be approximately 7 years. Again, no guarantees when you would be accepted into that process, but you're investing about $800,000 per year to keep that school up and running. So over the course of 7 years, you're looking at about $5.5 million. What you see here in an accelerated timeline is if the town were to take that project, the Mitchell School project on their own. So you would have a partnership with the MSBA for the Pollard School, but then you would take on funding the Mitchell School on your own. And you could, again, because you shorten the timeline, save some money. So that's option B. 2 is the accelerated project, and B1 would be if the MSBA were participating in both projects and they were if they one followed the other. And then finally, we looked at High Rock as an elementary school, but Pollard being the town project and Mitchell being the MSBA project. And the reason, one of the reasons we're looking at this is because the MSBA has told the town that they're expecting the town to submit into their statement of interest the most needy project. And as we can tell from that graph that I had showed you earlier, Mitchell is the most needy project in the district. But again, if the goal is to have High Rock as an elementary school, it would be best for the town to take on the Pollard School project, go into the MSBA with the Mitchell School, waiting for funding and partnership with the MSBA. And at the time that the Pollard School would be finished, be able to move the students from High Rock out of the High Rock School into the new Pollard School. And then you would have that swing space available for the students for the Mitchell School, saving $41 million in a temporary school, and then move through and finish the construction on the Mitchell School. This is the shortest timeline. Again, if all things fall into place with the MSBA, you could complete your master plan by 2027. There's also the least amount of money, again, because time is money. So the entire project would be estimated around $252 million. Now that's a lot to take in, so I'm sure you have a lot of questions.
Madam Chair, I do have some questions. Thank you.
Sure, Josh.
It was good to see these side by side, the master plan and the Emery Grover building, because I think they really are a set of projects altogether. In the master plan, I found the discontinuation of High Rock actually has one other potential benefit. So after it's used as swing space during the process for Pollard and for Mitchell, it might also be able to be converted as to house the administration building afterwards. I wonder if that had been considered. I know in the Emery Grover study, there were several other sites that were considered in the alternative sites list. And so I had questions about those too, but I guess that from my perspective, already having a building at High Rock, and if that were able to be used, might be the most advantageous. The other point I just wanted to mention was about the timelines. I noticed that under the accelerated plan for the school master plan, the earliest both Pollard and Mitchell would be able to be completed was 2027. And at the same time, the Emery Grover presentation aimed for that to be completed on the Emery Grover site by 2025. And I just wanted to I guess, clarify if there was a prioritization that the school committee had taken, if they consciously decided to prioritize the school administration building being completed earlier than the schools. In my opinion, it seems like we would want to make sure that the schools were completed beforehand, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Let me try to respond to that. It's a great question. We are presenting all these projects together because they're all, the school committee has purview over all of them and would have to shepherd them through the capital planning process, town meeting, and ultimately potentially a vote at the polls. That'd be their responsibility. The reality, though, is that it's a little bit of apples and oranges. It's absolutely true that our school buildings that are containing children need to be attended to and addressed. It's also true that we need to take care of a building that supports all of the children and staff in our buildings. They're really on different paths and they do have different needs. I would say that the EG building, I don't see it as a priority over a dilapidated school building. I would say, fortunately, that the town has been able to invest some resources, clearly, as we've seen at Mitchell, with modular classrooms, for example, to help it limp along for the next several years. That's not true at EG. I will tell you tonight that I recognize that the EG project is quite expensive and is kind of out there. But I will also tell you that I will suggest to the school committee that if we're unable to tackle an EG project, which I completely understand given the resources available, I'm going to recommend that we include in our budget lease space and we abandon EG. I say that because the building is no longer sustainable. One example I can give you out of many, but there has not been heat in the EG building since last March. Now I know that because when we shut down schools, I remained working at the building. And we had a problem with the furnace at that time. It has never been repaired. It's still not working. So there is no heat in the building except for the myriad space heaters that we have plugged in and short-circuited and kept the building to the degree we can warm. There is one area of the building upstairs that has a heat fan of an electric nature upstairs, but it doesn't work well or regularly. That's one example of why we have to make a decision about EG. We're either going to renovate it or we're going to abandon it. And that decision's coming sooner rather than later. And as far as Mitchell is concerned, we have to enter into the process with the MSBA. We're hopeful, by the way, that the MSBA will even entertain new statements of interest this winter, but we're not certain. They haven't indicated whether or not they're going to open the window, which means the entire project would, or the entire getting on the path would be pushed back an entire year. So, Josh, I've thought a lot about your question, and over the years, you know, what do we prioritize? I think, though, for the school committee, it's not a false choice, but both projects we have to move forward one way or the other, either abandoning EG and leasing space and just making that decision, or and also moving forward on a school project. I don't think anymore it's an either or, it has to be an and. As far as High Rock as school administration, there are all kinds of possibilities, but EG will not last until 2027 when High Rock would be empty. Something would have to happen in the interim. That something, by the way, wouldn't be just go sit at Hillside, because that has its own problems. Perhaps that's where leased space comes in. At the same time, remember, we'd be making a smaller school at Mitchell, and presumably there'd be redistricting to help us deal with all the elementary students in the district. And so we would need that inventory at High Rock to house elementary students. At the same time, enrollment is always one of those things that we have to look at carefully. We know our enrollment is off this year by almost 300 students. We know that we have to study that carefully. We would have to work with the MSBA because they would also have their own enrollment projections. And we'd have to use all that in this calculus of deciding what could we ultimately use High Rock for. Right now, we believe it would be needed for elementary students. Perhaps, though, depending on how enrollment goes, it could have another purpose. And as you suggest, perhaps school administration. But that's only if something is done with school administration beginning in the next year or so until 2027.
Thank you.
Dan, actually, that's 28. You would have to rethink High Rock after the students leave. So it'll take another year before you can actually move school administration there.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question? The study group, I believe their recommendation was the Hillside site, if I recall. And my question really is, what would be the cost of rebuilding on Hillside, and how does that compare? Because obviously it can meet any of the programmatic needs. There's no parking issue. I realize there's other issues related to Hillside, but that I believe was the recommendation of the steering committee at the time. And what was the timing of that, when Hillside is abandoned by public safety?
I would have to. Go ahead, Joel. Reese.
I was just going to say that in our preliminary test fits and studies, alternate sites, Hillside was one that we looked at. It does have sufficient area to construct a two-story building with ample parking, as you said, and room for an addition. However, we ran it through our cost estimator, and with the demolition, construction, environmental site cleanup at that site, all hard and soft costs, and contingency, construction contingency, that value was $28,500,000 roughly, closer to 600,000, 28.6. So it's at the high end of the options.
But it also doesn't factor in any value that could be obtained from monetizing the Emory Grover site as well. Or does
Right.
that include that?
It does not.
We
That-
did do a
it's just-
study. We did do a study to monetize the Emery Grover for a private developer, and it was because of the condition of the building, the hazardous materials in it, it was not a significant value. It's also very difficult.
What does that mean? What is not significant value in dollar terms?
I don't have that number in hand, right, Reese? Can you pull that out of the study? Do you know that?
It was, and it was a low number. I'll need just a moment to switch screens and get that information. So I will have to come back and answer that.
While we're looking at that, the plan is to move police out of Hillside in the early part of 2022, January, February.
So, Dick?
Yeah, Dan, I'm very sympathetic to the shortcomings of the Emery Grover building. In terms of lease space, I'm now going to go far beyond my area of any knowledge, but it strikes me that the commercial office space is very likely going to go through a reset as companies accept the fact that working from home is realistic, so the amount of office space needed is probably going to change dramatically. Has any attempt been made to rethink our conclusions based on the potential change in the market for commercial real estate? Because it clearly is feasible for the school department to move into an office building. It's not feasible or even desirable for a school to do so, but office space is office space in terms of the school department.
Yeah, we did discuss that as part of the study, and I think Reese talked about the cost benefit of doing that, leasing versus owning town space. We have not done anything recently, and I would imagine that yes, that would have to be part of the calculus.
It may be you reached the same conclusion, but it
Yeah.
seems to me it's got to be looked at based on the new environment potential.
Right, and I also think that for leasing, I don't think you're looking at a 20-year lease. I would think you're looking at something for 5 years while we see how things shake out. If you can't occupy that building because of no heat, there are plenty of spaces available on the other side of 128 that you could rent for 3 to 5 years without committing to 20 years to have people be warm and safe. Dan, you and your group, and then let things shake out and see how options present themselves during that time period. So I think you need to look through that lens, not a lens of a 20-year lease.
Oh, that's helpful. That's helpful to think about it that way. And
You're going to get it for a lot less than $35 a square foot.
TripAdvisor might pay you to take some of the space.
Well, and by the way, we hadn't thought about a short-term lease. At least I don't believe, and Hank and Steve, you'd have to correct me, and Ann, I don't believe we thought about something like that. I do want to be very clear, just because I don't want to leave this call saying that we're attending to the furnace at Emery Grover, and I think we'll have a fix. We just don't have it yet, but building maintenance is all over it. They've been very much focused. They've spent all their energy and most of their resources on the schools. So it's not as if we've been ignored. It's just that it's a fact of a building that was built in 1893.
Well, and also, Dan, I think it's important to point out that the roof is failing. You have buckets up on the attic floor, which has been condemned. Nobody can go up there. And
I've been working on my desk today.
The custodian has to go up on a regular basis to empty the buckets. And they put plastic on all the windows for the winter time. They can't do that this winter. because of getting fresh air. There's no way to get fresh air into the building and heat it
Right.
adequately for the people that are in there.
Yep.
Dan?
I'm sorry, I did find the numbers relative to sales. It was on page 55 of that assessment. And as you can appreciate, there was a range of values. They looked at condominium sales, apartments, or apartments for rent sold to an investor. The highest value, some of the values were negative. If you sold the building with, for instance, with restrictions that they could only use the existing volume within the building versus adding on to it, or if there were substantial historic preservation requirements within the building. Was the highest value for condominiums was only after the building was demolished by the town and the site turned over to the developer was at 1.8 million. Apartments for rent, again, if the building were previously demolished by the town, then the value of the site would be around $3 million. It would be a negative value if it were redeveloping the building within the volume. Yeah, and all of you have this full report, so I can refer you to page 55. So they're
I have that to show on screen if you'd like, Hank.
Okay. So I think, and of course, if the town were to demolish the building, there's costs associated with that, which I don't think are factored into, well, I should say, demolish the building and clean up the site, because there is also potentially an oil spill on the site, which would need to be cleaned up in any of the developments.
So is part of the appeal of staying on the site and renovating with an addition versus, I realize there's some cost benefit, but it's not significant. And I know there were other programming aspects that originally you looked into, I think, like, daycare, for example. I don't think that's not incorporated into this plan, but that was sort of on the wish list, I believe. My question is the fact that you could potentially use CPC funds if you retain the existing building in some form versus a de novo structure somewhere else part of the rationale for this recommendation?
I think when I think about what makes the most sense for school administration, I've believed this for a while now that I've been in the town for a while. I think the particular venue and our juxtaposition to town hall and the town center is the right location for school administration, as centrally located, if you will, as possible, both for just the administration of all the schools, the production center, the school transportation services, ease of families coming into town to register or to take care of school business and town business. So I think there's the nexus of municipal and school services in the center of town makes a lot of sense. And the reality is that the town and school departments, town and school finance departments are joined at the hip. And although a lot of our transactions are electronic, there's also a lot of personal business that's conducted between both of our offices on a regular basis, on a daily basis. So there is something about having it there, and there's no other space available near in town. The other piece is that nonetheless we could be open to whatever is affordable and will meet the program needs of the school department. my preference as your superintendent is the center of town for the reasons I laid out. And it's also a site that the school committee has purview over and the town owns right now. So it's a lot easier to think about parcels that you own rather than ones that you don't. And I think that was another part of the conversation. I also would say that just thinking about that building, it could be torn down, potentially could be torn down as long as we get through all the historic easements. But when we looked at tearing down the building and renovating the building, and we saw that the delta between the two and the costs associated with it, and what could go up there, we certainly did. I know I certainly did, and I know our designers did. Thought about, well, if you were able to maintain a facade, you can retain some portion of the historic nature of this community on its main street, anchoring that part of Highland Avenue with the town common on the other side, and that's not a bad deal. It keeps school administration in the center of town. It's property that you already own and doesn't have a lot of utility for any other use, as the previous slide showed, or minimal opportunity. And as an amenity in town, as a cultural or historical artifact, if you will, in town, if it can be renovated like Town Hall was to provide modern offices, then that could be a win-win all the way around. And then what follows from that is a possible request to CPC. But CPC really, in my view, for the reason I laid it out, wasn't a driver, because the costs in themselves are not as wildly different as you'd expect.
Rick?
Madam Chair, Dan, this is without knowledge of day-to-day work stream, but I'm wondering, have you considered at all the ability to work remotely and have a smaller space to accommodate some of the day-to-day transactions that obviously in a post-COVID world we're going to need? But if more people can work remote, we would certainly need a smaller space, maybe a more modern space, but a cheaper space all around. Have you given any? I'm sure you have. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Well, so we have not done a complete analysis of our COVID world and what the post-COVID world might look like. And although I do think it's something that I know Ann Galati and I have been thinking a lot about, we do have some staff who are working remotely for health needs. I will also say that most of our staff, though, is available because it is my view, when school is in session, people need to be present to take care of school services. That's handling cash, that's bus drivers coming in, that's parents coming in to sign up for services, community education is busy, meeting needs of families. So there absolutely are some positions that could be done remotely. I will tell you that there are many families in town who would like the superintendent to be remote on an island somewhere, disconnected from any authority or any responsibility or decision-making. So that's one possibility. And there are some opportunities to look at that anew, and perhaps that can help with the overall footprint of whatever it is that we end up doing. I think we need to go through that analysis. At the same time, we are at the heart a people business. And like many functions in town hall that require interactions and exchanges and dealing with the public, there's only so much that can be done remotely. But there are some things that can be done remotely, and we will absolutely, as we go through this process, consider what we can do.
And just turning to the school master plan, this all stemmed from, this started with the work that you did with the economist whose name escapes me over a year ago, right? So you started with that economic enrollment outlook and then built the master plan on that basis. So what I'm wondering is, in a post-COVID world, if you will, does the economic analysis and enrollment projections need to be revisited, for reduction in housing formation, reduction in size of families? I'm just wondering if that needs to be revisited in the context of some of these projects.
So I would imagine that we will, so the answer is yes, in the sense that because this is the first step in a very, very long process, we know, for example, with the MSBA, they're going to set aside any enrollment projections that we do. They'll glance at them, they'll say thank you very much, and they will conduct their own enrollment analysis. So that's one answer to your question. The other part of it is because this is going to be a multi-year effort, we are absolutely going to have to engage in, are we right sizing any of the projects that we're doing? Of course, we'll have to at some point quickly narrow down an enrollment target so that we can design something. But that will be part of the analysis. We did, the gentleman you're referring to is Jerry McKibben out of South Carolina. He is working with us right now to develop enrollment projections. He is also considering the economy and also real estate and what that means. And he is putting together an analysis for us that will be ready fairly soon, Ann, I think.
Yes.
Although that is not designed to inform this particular process. It certainly can be used to help us think about where we're going. Would that be fair to say, Ann?
That's correct. We have multiple series being prepared. One is a sort of a real a COVID series, essentially sort of where we are and projecting that out and what it might look like to over the next couple of years from an enrollment perspective. And that would be compared to sort of a no COVID series. What would that look like had COVID not happened? And we'll see, I think we'll see sort of a convergence within a few years of those estimates. So we'll have a couple different estimates to look at, including a COVID and a no COVID scenario.
Great, thanks.
I think, if I may, Madam Chair, the rate of tear downs and reconstruction of houses within Needham has not slowed down. In fact, if anything, it's kept pace with the COVID period. And that is certainly one of the drivers of the school increase in enrollment. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're seeing this year is unique to this year. And families that might have taken other options, such as private schools, might well be coming back after this year is over.
Yeah, it's early to tell, but of the approximately 300 students, we have 300 fewer students than we had projected. And I would say close to 70 of those are kindergartners who did not show up. And we fully expect most of them to show up in the first grade.
Mm-hmm.
But doesn't that speak to sort of making sure that we, in a sense, not rush this, but but see what the effects are when we sit here next year and see if those 300 are still not in the schools or if they are back in the schools, and have the benefit of that information. At least from my own point of view, I think it's, to rush into things during COVID when there's so many uncertainties and we don't know whether those 300 are coming back or not. We will know next September, and I think it would be foolish to assume to go forward with a study that's a pre-COVID study, thinking it's all going to go back to normal, immediately or post-COVID. At least I'm not convinced of that.
Yeah, I understand that both of these studies were pre-COVID, and they did not factor in what's happening out there and what could happen out there. I'll also say, though, that at some point in time you say, okay, this is the work we've done, and now let's start thinking about what it can be. We can always wait or defer or wait until things change, but the big idea here was, as it has been for many years, is what do we need to do next, and what's the cost-benefit analysis of what we need to do. So it happens to land in the middle of this mess, And we have to consider what that means. There's no question about that. Whether or not we pause it, I don't know. I would say that one of the things that will be a signal will be whether or not the MSBA opens up its statement of interest. It's very possible they won't. They may wait an entire year, in which case this conversation will, I don't think this conversation should stop, but I think it will be delayed, and we'll have to consider what what it all means.
And to that point, though, if they do open up the window, can somebody discuss what needs to happen immediately? Because there seemed to be, from the chair's meeting, a very accelerated process that needed to occur.
I'm going to defer to one of our friends in Doran Whittier to say what would need to happen. I don't think it would be rushed by any means, but.
Okay.
Dan, if I may,
Go ahead, Hank.
it's a hurry up and slow down process with the SBA. You hurry up to get your statement of interest in by January of 2021, and then you wait almost a year for them to go through the analysis to see whether you're even admitted. And so there's a slowdown of a full year. And then only after you're admitted do you begin the process of the study. And that was factored into the timelines that Michelle was showing on her charts.
So what's required for a statement of interest? Is it a one-page document? Is it a fees? Do you have to? Is it need to be backed up with a master plan study or a feasibility study, or what? If we want to go forward with something in 2 months in January with a statement of interest, what does that entail?
So if I could, the statement of interest is basically, it's a form that's provided by the MSBA with a number of sections in it that identifies the needs that the facility has, both physical, educational, structural, mechanical, all that would be factored in to the writing of the statement of interest and the submitting of it. The position you're in now is you have basically all that information put together because of the study that we've done and the work that the town has been doing over the years. So you're poised in a very good position to submit something early next year.
Yeah.
So are you working on it now? I mean, that's 2 months away. So
Well, I just want to clarify the timing. In a typical year, the MSBA statements of interest for a core program project are typically due the first week in April. And in 2020, they actually extended that deadline into May because of the COVID circumstances. So unless
So the window usually opens in January.
Right.
but the deadline is typically the first week in April. So I think in all of our timelines, we identified February as the target for submitting a statement of interest. So as Don has suggested, all of the information is available to the district, I think right now is at the conclusion of our master plan study. It's just a matter of populating the form properly should the MSB open the window.
Dick?
Yeah, the question is a follow-up to John's question. How much flexibility do we have to change directions, if you will, to the statement of interest that we've submitted? And you're locked in a particular approach, or do you have a fair amount of flexibility? So I guess the question is, does it make sense that we try to reserve our spot, but still keep open for testing some of the things that we're trying to throw on the table now?
And maybe you can add to what I'm about to say, but in my experience, the MSBA expects cities and towns to submit a single priority project. And I think in conversations with MSBA so far in Needham, that conversation is focused around the Mitchell School. However, that being said, there are lots of examples where the MSBA has allowed cities and towns to explore more than one scenario at a time. In fact, that's happened here in Needham when the Hillside project was underway. the MSBA allowed you to explore possibilities at both High Rock and at Hillside. And so there may be some wiggle room. The MSBA always reserves the right to set their own mind, but there is typically some wiggle room once you get invited in about what can be explored. Ultimately, only one project can result, but there may be some flexibility in what is explored.
I would also say that there's a fixed schedule that is triggered by a submission. Once the MSBA does its analysis, and if Needham were to be selected into what's called their eligibility period, we would have 270 days at that point to complete a series of steps, including obtaining funding for a feasibility study. So once you're in the project, you're actually expected to move forward. And then you have a very specific window of time to do that.
But didn't I hear it's going to be a year from the time we submit the statement of interest before we clear that hurdle?
It could be up to a year.
Yeah.
It's up to the board, their board.
Yeah, historically, what the MSBA board does is they would release their first projects into the eligibility phase around the same year. So December of 2021, you could hear, or it could get pushed to January, February, March of the next year.
I also think that it's important to understand that when you submit for an SOI, you're submitting what your problems are, not the solution. So when you get in there, that's when you get to explore all the feasible solutions.
Louise, do you have a question? I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
No, that's all right. That's all right. No worries. So actually I have a comment and then a discussion item for the Finance Committee. So my first comment is, I think that we've been tossing around Mitchell and Pollard and renovations and what we were going to do with them for a really, really long time. And so I think it is clear that we have to do something about the state of the schools. I mean, in my own view, obviously Mitchell is in much worse physical condition than the Pollard School, partly because the Pollard School is so big so that whatever physical issues there are can be accommodated within the building in some way. Not necessarily, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying they can be. But I think that what we really need to think about is once we start the statement of interest process, there really are decision points that we have to make from a fiscal perspective. And are we ready to move forward with the order of magnitude in terms of costs that are being presented? Regardless of which option it is, there are certain orders of magnitude that are being, put on the table. And is that something that today, right now, without a capital plan, we're ready to discuss? Or when will we be ready to discuss? Do we need the capital plan and see how this all fits into it? So that's just my item for consideration.
John?
So Louise, I mean, I completely agree with you, and I understand the study was done sort of in the silo of just looking at, from the school's point of view, what best fits their facilities and their programs. But that then needs to mesh into the town. And, if I look at the numbers correctly between Emory Grover and the program that was set forth in the facility study, it's about 280 million. I'm just going to use that as a number of that we would have to come up with or borrow to do this program. And I think I understand it here that I think our present debt for all our projects that we're ongoing and we're still paying for is about 150 or 160 million dollars. So we're well exceeding with this program all the other things that we've done to date and that we're still paying to date and are still going to be paying some of them for another 10 and 15 and 20 years. And when you consider that, and then when you consider what our debt policies are with respect to borrowing and what we can borrow and what the limits are and what those limits impose on us, there clearly has to be a interface of those policies and limits and realities of what we presently have on the book versus what's being proposed here. And then going to what Dan said earlier about what other town projects are out there as well, whether it's DPW or other types of things. So it's an incredibly involved process. This is a component of it, but this is not the whole thing. And I think it's a puzzle that we're going to have to put together, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of information. So I don't think that we can rush into this, for example, to say, yes, we're going to, fund a feasibility study for Pollard in this May, or yes, we're going to fund design funding for Emery Grover this May, until that whole puzzle has been brought together. And we've had thorough and robust discussions about it.
Oh, Tom.
Yeah, hi. I have just one question. I don't know about the MSBA process all that well, but given what Louise and John just talked about, and I agree with, if I certainly as a finance committee member don't feel like I have the ability to make a decision in the next few months. So my question is, if we put in a application and it is approved and then we find out we can't really afford it and have to pull back, have we done ourselves a disservice with the MSBA? And would it be, I guess I'm wondering if we need more time to think about, can we afford this, or how we're going to pay for all these projects, which are necessary, but how are we going to pay for it if we start the process and we realize we have to pull back? Is that a problem for us? And should we instead apply a year from now? And I know that delays everything, but I'm just understanding if we're going to put ourselves into disservice if we rush the application and then have to pull back.
Tom, it's a good question. I really don't know. I think maybe Don, you have a perspective on this, and Jason and Michelle. I do know Needham has an excellent reputation with the MSBA. And mostly because of the Permanent Public Building Committee and the work that they've done, and I would say in particular the work that Steve has done and Hank have done, and everybody for many years on the Permanent Public Building Committee. It has a good reputation. They know when Needham says this is what we need to do, that they trust it can happen, and we've been good partners. So I am sure if we went in as a good faith effort this winter and proposed something, but then found out for whatever reason, 6 months from now, while they are still deliberating, that it just didn't make sense. I don't think that would put us on their bad list for the future. But Don, maybe you have a different perspective.
Actually, it's one of those things that while communities will go into a program identifying the needs of a facility, nobody truly knows what something's going to cost. So your biggest outlay of cash could be in the $1 million range if you get accepted. But, $1 million, $1.5 million. But I think what's important is when you submit your application, they will review the application, and then they will do what's called a senior study and site visit and whatnot. And I would expect that you'd be looking into your finances and seeing what you may want to do as a community for such a large project over the period of the year 2021. And you may get to the point where, say it's December or say it's February of 2022, where they might invite you in there. You have that conversation with, hey, they're asking you, are you ready? And you may not be, right? So they'd rather know before you actually get invited in than getting invited in and backing out.
I think, Don, I believe the consequence to, because there are various points at which a community may not be able to move forward. Perhaps the feasibility study isn't funded, or the override fails, for instance, to fund the construction. At that point, I believe your process simply stops.
That is correct.
And that there is not a deferment. So you don't get to continue at some later date or in a different year. You would have to reapply through the eligibility process and be reaccepted. And the MSBA may or may not, be very, scrutinize your application closely if you were unable to go through the process for the same project earlier.
Right. That's why
Once you've been accepted. Yeah.
once you've been accepted, that's why I'm suggesting if you have these conversations throughout calendar year 21, you may know before they ask you and invite you in where you stand.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So I have a question for Dave Davidson. Are you still on the line, Dave?
Yes, I am.
So has started an analysis of the capital planning process for this project at all?
No, I have not.
And when would you start something like that?
That will begin after we go through all the capital projects. So it'll be December, January.
Before you would even start looking at this?
In terms of looking at a debt financing schedule, because I still have to pull together assumptions of cash flow requirements, timing of the different authorizations, because all that impacts when debt's being issued and debt that is dropping off. But I would anticipate certainly in time for the discussion for the annual town meeting warrant that there will be a facility financing update that would incorporate school projects and town projects.
Does anybody else have any questions for the group? Louise.
I just have one more. So in terms of who applies though for who submits a statement of interest, as I recall it, it's a school committee with the Board of Selectmen. And so is there a plan to file a statement of interest in the next 8 weeks or so?
No, there's no.
10 weeks?
There is no formal plan right now. We have, in fact, the presentation that you heard tonight is going to be shared with the select board. They have not even seen it yet, although they're generally aware, but they're going to get this entire presentation, which of course will prompt further conversations about whether or not they and the school committee would be interested in doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, I would just, I was texting with my son who works for a commercial real estate firm. He did tell me there is 100,000 feet of space at PTC and 100,000 at TripAdvisor that's being actively shopped for what it's worth.
Wow.
And I hear the cafeteria is free.
Okay. All right. Well, if it gets chilly later this week, I maybe head over there with a few people.
I'm sure.
Josh.
Just one more question. We received the executive summary of the master plan. Do you know when we'll expect to receive the full report?
Hank, are you still on board? So it's been uploaded and I don't know if I thought it had been distributed so far, but if not.
Well, we forwarded it to Dan for his, Dan and Ann, and really I'm waiting on their signal.
Yeah, I think you forwarded it yesterday or 2 days ago, and I have yet to take a look at it. It's my intent to look at it this week, and I don't really think there's anything else I could add to it, to be honest with you, but I will send that signal through Ann to the designers so we can get it going.
Thank you.
There have been edits and updates today as well.
Now, the executive summary, I think, is a very good summary, and a lot of which you saw in tonight's presentation. The section 2 goes into great detail for each building, and so you get into the real nitty-gritty and there's a cost for renovation and improvements at each of the buildings. And so even though Broad Meadow, for instance, wasn't mentioned here, it does have needs for ongoing maintenance in the future because it's approaching its 20th year. And all of that is indicated in the detail of those master plan.
Great. Does anybody have anything else for the group? All right. Well, thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. There's a lot for us to consider. So I'm sure this is just the beginning of a much longer term conversation.
It is absolutely the first step in a long journey. So we appreciate you letting us start with you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay warm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I think you're ready to move to Finance Committee updates.
Okay, I have, is it Aaron, Andrea, Michael Grice still on this?
We're still on, Carol. Is that a problem?
I'm sorry?
We are still on, yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know. Updates.
Yep.
Comments. Next steps. I think John and Louise are right, though. We need to really put together a much more long-term financing plan to see how this, even part of it, fits into the context of what we already have on the books. So I think we need to work toward that. Dick?
Yeah, I totally agree. On the other hand, as the point Louise made, is we've been talking about this for a long time. We know something's got to be done. So it's not a question of, well, we don't really need to focus, and there's got to be some sort of action plan come out of this.
No, and I agree with you, Dick, on that. And to me, the thing that was most telling when you looked at that chart with the greens and yellows and reds was Mitchell was red across the board.
Yeah.
And Pollard is not, there's no reds on Pollard.
Yeah.
And there's no reds on High Rock. And so I can understand from a planning point of view with Legos, how it would be nice to have this go here and that go there and that like that. But the point is that Mitchell is red across the board. It's 70 years old. Those of us who have been in there, I remember being there with you, Dick, a couple of years ago, and you looked at it, and it's to me, it's our number one priority. And we're going to have to go in a linear. We're not going to be able to do all these things at once. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have to go in a linear progression. Yep. And I think the sooner we make that decision and start down that path, yep, the sooner we'll get to Mitchell and the sooner we'll get all these things done. But if we start to mess around with trying to fund a $275 million all-in project, it's not going to happen. And so I just think that we should disabuse people of that sooner rather than later and start to look at it, doing it in a linear way.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. It's just the sheer enormity of adding that tax burden in the next 5 to 7 years on top of everything we have just is not tenable. I know you're right. The sequencing is really great the way they have it, but not for the finances. It's not. So
we're hitting our peak funding right now. I mean, literally this year or next year, I think we are literally at the peak that we've ever been at. So
there would have to be, in my mind, an overwhelming presentation that deferring this is economically stupid. So searching for the correct term. And I don't see that presentation having been made. They'd have to say, really present an overwhelming case that doing it all at once makes enormous sense, and I don't see it.
It only makes sense if people can afford it. And I don't think there's any way they can show us taking on close to $300 million of debt in the next 5 to 7 years.
Well, we blow up all of our principles.
It's just not doable. So we have to figure out how to do Mitchell and string everything else along. That's just
Well, and in fairness, Mitchell and deal with Emory Grover.
Right.
The Emory Grover, as we all said, you go lease space for 3 to 5 to 6 years, whatever it is, and we'll just have to take on that cost. But that's manageable and it's short term.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. Any other updates, questions, concerns?
Is our next meeting in a month?
The next meeting is December 9th.
December 9th.
So and we'll be getting, at that point, the department spending requests. And it'd be helpful to know if people want a paper binder or whether they're okay with an electronic version. And you don't have to tell me now, but think about that. John, I know you want paper.
Thank you, Louise.
You can make his law firm pay for the printout.
It doesn't bother him.
It's part of my overhead.
I'm fine with electronic, Louise. That's
Okay.
Ditto.
Okay.
I need paper.
Yeah, I'm old school. I'm old school too.
Okay.
Old school.
Yeah, Louise, I'll take a binder as well.
So will I, so everybody's saying so.
I've got 10 binders sitting in my office right now I'm trying to get rid of.
Josh, do you have a?
I kind of like paper, but
You like
I was
paper
hesitant
too?
to say that.
Okay. So just Carol and Barry are electronic.
Would it help, Louise, to give you back last year's binder?
You can ask Dave that if Dave wants.
Dave, would you like it back?
Is it in usable condition?
Yes, it is.
Then
Has it been opened?
I just keep it in the corner, light a candle in front of it, so it's absolutely wonderful.
Yes, certainly we will take them back.
Dave, I have a bunch too. I can give you empty notebooks.
Is there a box in front of town hall we should drop it in, or just walk it in?
There's a big red box they're not using anymore. We could throw it in there.
We could give people stacks of paper with holes in them. If you guys can put it on the binder yourself.
That's true. Yeah, do that.
Yeah, that's easy.
That's
enough.
even better.
Oh, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
You're reneging, Barry?
He's got the binders, so.
Well, I just probably print out the ones that I focus on and not, anyway, I don't know. Too late to make a tough decision like this right now.
Well, we can think about it.
Actually, going back to the next meeting, isn't there something with the selectmen and,
No, there's a school liaison meeting before that.
No,
no, but isn't there something on like
No.
the 16th or the 19th
I think
of November?
It's a COVID presentation.
That's
The 19th, 4 o'clock.
It's just not a finance committee meeting.
Okay, okay.
So
But it's one we're all invited to, correct?
Right. It's just an update on the COVID situation, I think, in the town.
Yep.
Yeah, you're all invited as panelists.
Yeah,
So you can
whatever.
speak.
All right, anything else?
that's it. Just a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. Good